Okay, book review time. I finally read Dune, and first of all, what a absolutely gorgeous copy of the book this one is. On the front, it's got embedded the mantra of fear. Fear is the mind killer. And when you initially open it up, it's got these gorgeous images, especially this one here with the sandworm off in the distance. And even on the inside of the dust jacket, it's got this gorgeous image. This was a very awesome edition, and the book was really good. At its core, one of the main themes of the book is the power of the mind. And there is a lot to be said about that. The mind is the greatest battlefield you will ever face. If you convince yourself it's not going to work and you're defeated up here, then you don't stand a chance. If you convince yourself you can do this, you can succeed in your goals, you have a fighting chance. Dune follows Paul Atreides, who is not the hero of the story. There are traditional antagonists and protagonists, but there are no heroes. Paul is a flawed person who goes on to do flawed things, and those choices lead to atrocities that are ultimately committed in his name. He's the son of the Duke of House Atreides, who has been tasked with taking over spice production on Arrakis. Another cool thing, the bookmark is the ticket from the movie. And it's actually not a gift. It's a trap. The Emperor has become jealous of the Atreides' popularity in the Landsrat, which is the group of the noble houses, and the Atreides soldiers are beginning to rival the Emperor's Sardaukar, as well as House Harkonnen, who was originally over Arrakis. The plan is for House Harkonnen, along with disguised Sardaukar soldiers, to destroy the Atreides, and the Emperor can have full deniability. There are so many layers to the plans that different characters have in this book. It refers to them as plans within plans, which is kind of ultimately why things come crashing down for some of these people. Their plans are too complex with too many moving parts. Paul is the son of a Bene Gesserit. They're this quasi-religious order of women who have certain abilities. They can even access, at a certain point, ancestral memories. They have a combat form called the Weirding Way, and they have this multi-generation long selective breeding program where they're hoping to produce what's known as the Kwisatz Haderach, which is a male Bene Gesserit that can access the full range of ancestral memories. Women can only access female ancestral memories, but Paul, who ultimately is the Kwisatz Haderach, when he comes into fullness of his power, he can access male and female ancestral memories. The Bene Gesserit have also seeded religions and what's not through these lands, these different worlds, even Arrakis and the Fremen people who are important to the story. Spice is something, two things are an analog for oil in this book. The spice, which it can prolong white life, increase awareness, and it also makes space travel possible. There are this guild called Navigators, and some of them are consume so much spice it mutates them, and these are the ones that can navigate ships and allow faster than light travel. So essentially, without spice, the Imperium will collapse. It's that important. But water is also an analog for oil because of its scarcity on Arrakis. One of my favorite scenes in the book is this dinner party where everyone there has their own political agenda. And Paul explains to someone who's from Arrakis, who has never been off of Arrakis, that the concept of drowning, they didn't know or understand what drowning is. And I thought that was very interesting. The characters are good, even though Paul, the more he comes into the fullness of his powers, the more unrelatable and arguably unlikable he becomes. And it's really, as Frank Herbert said himself, he wrote this book because he feels charismatic leaders should come with a warning on their foreheads, may be hazardous to your health. A quote by him was, two of the most important presidents was John F. Kennedy, who showed us the danger of charismatic leaders because he got us into Vietnam, and Richard Nixon, who taught us to distrust the government. I'm not saying whether I agree with his political stances or not, but they're rooted in this book and they're portrayed in an interesting way. And that's the thing, modern writers, you can put your political beliefs in a story as long as you portray them in an interesting enough way and not just point the finger and say you're evil unless you think like this. People will like your story. Some of my favorite standout characters are Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck, who was the Atreides house retainer, and just an all-around well-done character. The whole point until the attack on the Atreides compound on Arrakis, you feel like there's this specter of doom over House Atreides. And after the attack, when a doctor who's a sooth doctor and they're imperial conditioned for the great houses so they can't harm other people, because these dukes in whatever of the great houses, you're always fearing assassination. So to have your personal doctor conditioned to where he can't harm other people is a huge benefit. The Baron Harkonnen breaks that conditioning, and it's the doctor that ultimately betrays them over thinking he's going to get his wife back. And Paul ultimately winds up in the desert with his mother, and the doctor was smart enough to know, yeah, the Baron's probably going to double team me, so double cross me, so he took the Duke's signet ring and made sure Paul got it. Paul winds up with the Fremen people, and a great scene I like is as he joins them, one Fremen named Jameis challenges him to a fight, and Paul has to kill him, and then you get the funeral where Paul mourns for Jameis because he taught him how horrible of a thing it is to take his life, and Paul, because of that, he considered himself a friend of Jameis because of the lesson he taught him. Now, I'm sure everyone, you've seen images of Dune, you've seen people with the blue eyes. That blue eyes is from spice addiction to the point where it's just saturated into your blood, because on Arrakis, the spice is in the air, it's in the food, it's in everything. You can't help it. It's so everywhere that trace amounts will be in everything you consume. And when you get to that level of spice addiction, you can't stop taking spice or you'll die. As Paul comes more into his powers, he starts having visions of a jihad in his name. To paraphrase what it was in the book, ravenous hordes drunk on spice liquor, worshipping at the altar of his father's skull. And Paul doesn't want this jihad to happen. He wants to get revenge on the Harkonnens, and he wants to ascend to the throne, but he doesn't want the jihad to happen. And despite the fact that, and I'm going to do a video on this subject later, but despite the fact that he's ignoring the litany of fear, I will not, fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that causes total obliteration. Paul does not overcome this fear. He does not let it pass over him. He lets the fear guide decisions. There's one point when he takes an important ritual, and it's a manhood. Well, it's something all Fremen have to do where they put these hooks in this giant sandworms and ride them. After that, he knows the people are expecting him to challenge his mentor Stilgar for leader of the tribe. Paul doesn't want to do this because he likes Stilgar, and he even argues we're weakening ourselves by doing this. Before you go into battle, do you bash your knife against rocks? He's trying to find easy way outs at times, partially because, he is using the Fremen people to a degree. He has his goals, and the Fremen are just a pawn in that goal. Everyone has this book. It's like a multifaceted chessboard with multiple players playing against each other. Just like the Duke Leto, Paul's father, who has a good reputation for being good to people under him. He's not just doing that out of the kindness of his heart, even though he is a decent person. There are political motivations behind that because it inspires loyalty. Where with Paul, by not killing Stilgar and fully taking on the mantle of the Lisan al-Gaib, he becomes a religious leader that they block around and ultimately commit this jihad in his name. So that fear and Paul trying to take the easy way out brings about the worst case scenario. And it's interesting with Paul's visions, he doesn't just see a set future, he sees multiple possible features. The finale is kind of an anticlimax, but the story continues. I plan on reading at least Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. I know the series kind of ends on a cliffhanger because Frank Herbert died before he can finish the book, but I think reading those three as a trilogy will suffice for me. If I had to give the book one negative, it doesn't explain certain things really well. It almost expects you to know what certain terminology means and whatnot, but it's still a really great complex book. Lots of political maneuvering, even with the Baron Harkonnen and the Emperor's alliance. Like, the Baron sees the Emperor sees the Baron as a pawn on his board, and the Baron sees the Emperor as a double-edged pawn on his board, because even with going after House Atreides, the Baron knows this can hurt him, but at the same time, the Baron's like, I can rally the other houses behind me if this were to get out and be like, yeah, the Emperor talked me into this. Plans against, there's just so many layers, like the Emperor trying to groom his nephew Fade Ralpha not the Emperor, the Baron grooming his nephew Fade to take his place, but also trying to maneuver in such a way that he'll survive it. Fade thinking to himself when he gets everything he can, the Baron's a dead man. The Baron's a great villain. He's he's probably the most perverse, sickening character in the book. I don't care to repeat some of the stuff he does in the book, but I highly recommend Dune. I give it a solid A+. This is up there with works like Lord of the Rings and some of Stephen King's best works, but I'd say Lord of the Rings even overshadows Stephen King. So like, share, comment, subscribe. I'm doing the 80s movie, the new movie, and like I said, the video on Paul's fear causing the jihad. Over and out.